Hey everyone, it's Tobes, and welcome to your second monitor. Today is the next video in my series of Secrets of Strixhaven Commander deck techs. I'm releasing a new Strixhaven Commander deck every Thursday through the end of June when Marvel Superheroes drops, in addition to my usual Monday Commander deck tech videos. We've only got 1 week left until then, so let me know in the comments what you think next week's deck will be. As you see, today our commander is Mica, Reader of Ruins, a Lorehold student and geomancer who loves working in the field. Mica has a reputation for being the guy you talk to if you want to know about the physical history of Arcavios, the earth of the plane, in addition to the secrets it holds. Mica lacks many of his peers' affinity for spirit magic, but he excels in his geomantic interests, so he's not too put out. He makes frequent trips across the continent to collect samples and unearth fossils, and while he's a little quiet and standoffish, he is also absolutely jacked, so maybe he's better at carrying rubble and artifacts than he is at carrying a conversation? We all have our strengths. I'm excited to show you what I put together for Mica, but before we get started, let's go over my deck building template. I like to build my decks around my commander. I want to show off why it's such a cool card and why I put it at the head of my deck. So I take about 30 cards and put them toward doing whatever my commander asks of me. This is our game plan. It's what we do at the table and how we try to win. 30 more cards go towards supporting that game plan in the form of card advantage, acceleration, and interaction pieces. I usually run 1 or 2 sweepers, sometimes more if it would play into the game plan, sometimes none at all, and I almost always keep to a floor of 38 lands. That way I can always hit my land drops and cast my spells and, play commander. So let's talk about our commander. Mica, Reader of Ruins, is a 4/4 legendary human artificer for 3 and a red. Mica has Ward, pay 3 life, pretty good, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may sacrifice an artifact, and if you do, copy that spell and you may choose new targets for the copy. That's right, it's another Lorehold spell copying deck. But unlike my Aziza deck, linked in the video's description, this one is less about building a wide board of creatures than it is about using artifacts to chain spells together into ridiculous, scattered board states. Then it's up to us to dig through the detritus of our playmat and make sense of the mess we've made. That may sound like it's a bad thing, but honestly, I love spellslinger strategies, and mono red is a great place for them. Mica wants us to have plenty of spells to put on the stack, as well as plenty of artifacts we can sack to double those spells' effects. That doesn't leave us much room for creatures, but that kind of plays into Mica's own inclination towards solitary work. It also gives us a reason to focus on one of the things red does best: burn. Our play pattern is simple. We drop some artifacts that give us value, usually both when they enter and when they leave the battlefield. Then, with Mica in play, we start casting spells. Some of our sorceries are big haymakers, but most of our spells are here to set us up for our next spell, giving us tons of value and maybe some extra artifacts we can sack to copy whatever else we cast. It's a lot of fun to play spells that draw cards and make treasures and send damage at our opponents and their retinues, none of which are huge and splashy, until Mica copies them, and suddenly they are. And because each of our spells builds toward the next one, watching our turns feels like seeing a Raiders of the Lost Ark boulder picking up speed as it rolls toward the rest of the table. I mentioned treasures, which are a big part of our strategy. They act as temporary bursts of mana we can bank for when we need them, and as fodder for Mica's copying ability. We have cards that can take advantage of our token making, giving us free spells or extra tokens, or of course direct damage when our tokens land. We also have other ways to copy our spells in addition to Mica's ability, since why settle for 2 instances of a spell when we could have 3 or more? And all of it is meant to send damage upstairs for each of our opponents, burning them out after they've already lost life in combat with one another during the mid-game. What's most fun about this deck for me is that the gameplay loop is stable, but the list is peppered with neat cards that change the texture of each game. Sometimes we have a sky full of dragons, or endless clues and foods to sack for uses beyond Mica's ability, or a way to cascade into free spells almost every turn, or even a chance to give our opponents copies of our coolest spells in order to get even more copies for ourselves. And through it all, we're cutting through their life totals like a knife through cake, layer after layer, yielding to our payoffs and to our burn. We can't predict which kind of frosting we'll hit with each slice, but Mica knows best of all that each tier we traverse will teach us more than the last. The secrets may be buried, but with a little heavy lifting, we can dig our way from the surface of our study through to each one of our stratified subjects. What treasures will we find? You'll enjoy this deck if you like the interplay between the permanents on your playmat and the spells you put on the stack, or if you like the feeling of digging deep into your deck and taking delight in each curiosity you discover. So as usual, this Moxfield list we're going over today is linked in the video's description. At the bottom of it, you will find a considering section, full of cards that I considered putting in the deck, but ultimately which didn't make the cut for me. However, if you have a bigger budget, or a smaller one, if you like what I've done and you want to, I guess, do more of it, like a little bit more treasure you could certainly put into this, or if you want to take Mica in a different direction and you just need some inspiration, that considering section is a great place to begin when you build your own Mica Reader of Ruins deck. So let's begin. We're going to start with a section I call Fodder. These are all cards that either are or give us things that we can sacrifice to Mica in order to copy the next spell we're casting, or rather, to copy the spell that we have just put on the stack. So we're starting with kind of an interesting one. This is Devastating Onslaught. It's one of our sorceries. It's double X and a red for a sorcery that lets us make X tokens that are copies of target artifact or creature we control. Those tokens gain haste until end of turn, and we sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step. So normally we're not using this for creatures. We do have plenty of creatures in this deck that we can copy with Devastating Onslaught, but obviously we don't want to hit something that's legendary like Mica, because then we just have to legend rule them all away. But we do have plenty of artifacts in the deck, both tokens and otherwise, that we can copy with Devastating Onslaught. What's really fun is being able to say, okay, we've got a bunch of treasures, let's cast Devastating Onslaught to make a lot more of them, and sacrifice one to Mica to copy that and get even more. Then we use those treasures this turn, since we lose them anyway, so we get a huge burst of mana and use this sort of as a ritual. We can also use this on plenty of our other artifacts that can be useful in other ways, and then continually sacrifice those tokens to Mica to copy more and more things. So kind of a weird start for this video, but it's a fun card, and it can do a lot for us. Next, from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Eternal set, this is Shell Shock. X and a red for an instant that says for each opponent, choose up to one target creature that player controls, and Shell Shock deals X damage to each of those creatures, and we make a mutagen token for each creature dealt damage this way. So even if we're not killing all these creatures, we can just make X1 and we get 3 mutagens, assuming of course 3 opponents. Mutagens are tokens that at sorcery speed we can pay 1, tap, and sack to put a 1/1 counter on a creature. That seems like a lot of fun. You know, we can puff up our commander or any of our other creatures, but really, we have these mutagens so that we can sacrifice them to Mica, and that seems like a good time in addition to a spell that, without too much trouble, can just kill 3 creatures and give us 3 fodder. Next up is Wizard's Rockets from the Lord of the Rings set. A single generic mana for an artifact that comes in tapped, and if we pay X and tap and sack it, we can make X mana in any combination of colors. That's pretty nice. Sometimes we might just need a little extra red mana when we only have, or when we rather have a bunch of sources of colorless mana in our land base. So we can filter it, at least for one turn, through our Wizard's Rockets. Also, when this artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, we draw a card. So this is a good card for us to play and hold up if we need to filter mana, but whether or not we do, it's a single mana for something we can sack to Mica to copy whatever spell we're casting and draw a card in the process. Next up is Ichor Wellspring. Gotta run this one. 2 generic for an artifact that says when it enters or goes through the graveyard, we draw a card. So for the same reason of the Wizard's Rockets, but this draws us a card when it first comes in as well. It costs an extra mana and it doesn't filter for us, but that's 2 cards versus 1, so might as well run both. Manhole Cover, another Turtles card, is next. 2 generic for an artifact with Flash that when it enters, target creature gains indestructible until end of turn. That's a good way for us to protect Mica if ever we need to. A lot of our strategy is based around being able to copy our spells, so we want Mica to stick around, so this is one of our protective effects. And we can either use this as fodder, or pay 2 and sack it and draw a card. We can use that politically because it says target player draws a card, but usually it's going to be us. So it's kind of like a clue in that way. Yeah. Another Turtles card is Mouser Foundry. 1 and a red for an artifact that says when it enters or leaves, we make a 1/1 colorless robot artifact creature token. So that's not just it comes in and it's something we can sacrifice, but also it comes in and makes something else we can sacrifice, and when we sacrifice it, it leaves another thing behind. So if we're sacking artifacts for 2 mana, we're getting 3 artifacts in order to sacrifice them. So there's a couple of different versions of this effect that we've seen throughout Magic, like a servo schematic, that kind of thing from way back in Kaladesh block. But yeah, I think Mouser Foundry is the best of these because it gives us these 1/1s that we may need and has an additional effect, which is for 4 and a red, we can sacrifice the Foundry to deal 3 damage to target creature. So it's a delayed removal effect. It's a little bit of a rattlesnake in that way, and we still end up for 2 mana with 2 things we can sacrifice to our commander, even if we're sacrificing the Foundry to itself. Next we have Noble's Purse. This card is just silly, but it's a lot of fun. This is a 2 mana artifact that comes in tapped and comes in with 3 coin counters on it. Coin counters don't have an inherent mechanical meaning, they're just used by this artifact. Because if we tap it and remove a coin counter, we get to make a treasure. So this is a good way for us to make repeatable treasures that we can use, of course, for mana or to sacrifice to our commander. But also, once the Noble's Purse is empty, after we've spent a couple of turns taking coins out of it, and we've got no more coin counters left on it, now the purse is doing nothing for us, so we might as well sacrifice it to Mica. Next is Prized Statue. This is very similar to Ichor Wellspring. For 2 generic, we get an artifact that when it enters or is put into a graveyard, we make a treasure. So rather than drawing a card, we get a treasure, kind of like rather than Mouser Foundry, which gives us a token creature, So Prized Statue works into our treasures theme, but works similarly to Mouser Foundry in that it comes in, is an artifact, makes an artifact, and when it leaves, it makes another artifact. Sure. Next we have Ravenous Robots. Ravenous Robots is actually a rare from Ninja Turtles. It's 1 and a red for a 2/1 artifact creature robot. It's a creature that says whenever you cast an artifact spell, you make a 1/1 colorless robot artifact creature token. And for a red and tap, creature tokens you control gain haste until end of turn. This is not usually relevant in this deck, but you never know. Sometimes it can be. And since it's repeatable, it doesn't require us to sacrifice the Ravenous Robots to activate it. That's pretty good. Also, we have 25 artifact spells in this deck. So obviously the Ravenous Robots is one itself, but if we get this out on turn 2, that's 24 possible robots that we have over the course of the game. So all of those are good as chump blockers, as potential attackers, sure, but really as fodder for our commander. Weapons Manufacturing is a card I've wanted to put into Commander deck ever since Edge of Eternities, and I may have put it in one other one, but this is the first one that really feels like it fits. So for 1 and a red, we get an enchantment that says whenever a non-token artifact you control enters, create a colorless artifact token named Munitions. When this token leaves the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to any target. So every time we play any of those 25 non-token artifacts, and we also have 2 more in the form of artifact lands in this deck, whenever any of those enters, as long as that artifact isn't a token, we get a shock on an artifact token, which of course we can use those tokens for a number of other things, but particularly we get to sacrifice them to Mica in order to copy a spell, and we get that free additional 2 damage on top of it. Sweet. Next is Academy Manufactor. It's kind of feast or famine in this deck. There's a collection of cards that are like north of $6 USD, and they're all incredible in this deck, and they're all good in other decks as well. And then everything else is totally cheap. So a lot of our like $80 that we're spending on this deck is collected in a few cards, and that's just funny to me. So we've got a couple of big, powerful cards that supplement the rest of this deck, which is doing fine on its own. So a good way to trim down the price of your deck if you want to drop some of these. So Academy Manufactor is a 1/3 artifact creature assembly worker for 3 generic that says if you would create a clue, food, or treasure, instead create 1 of each. So this is in the deck because we have a bunch of treasure creation, as we've seen a little bit of already. Every time we make a treasure, we get a clue and a food as well. We don't, I believe, have any ways of making clues or food on their own, so this is just giving us clues and food whenever we make a treasure. If you don't know what these do, a food is an artifact token that if you pay 2 and tap and sack it, you gain 3 life. A clue is a token that if you pay 2 and sack, you don't have to tap it, you can just draw a card. So Academy Manufactor turns all of our our treasure generation into cards on layaway and I guess life on layaway, but both of these, just like treasures, can provide us or can serve us as fodder for Mica. So being able to keep the clues, what I've done in my playing of this deck is every time I get a treasure, or any number of treasures, I get that same number of clues and food. I usually use the food as fodder for Mica, and I hang on to the clues just in case I need to pump mana into them and draw some cards. There's a lot of card advantage in this deck, so it hasn't happened yet, but having that available to us is pretty good, especially if you're in a situation where you really need life in your mono red deck. We've got Stride Hanger Automaton next. It's another replacement effect for us making artifact tokens. 3 generic for a 1/4 artifact creature construct that gives our Thopters +1/+1. And it says, if one or more artifact tokens would be created under your control, those tokens plus an additional 1/1 Thopter artifact creature token with flying are created instead. So don't worry, these don't have a loop with Academy Manufactor. Stride Hanger Automaton, no matter where we put the replacement effect in the order of applying them, still just makes us a single Thopter for each instance of creating artifact tokens. So if both of these are in play and we make a treasure, we will get a treasure, clue, and a food, and that's 1 or more artifact tokens, so we'll also get a Thopter. So the Thopters are a pretty nice way for us to have, again, like those robots we've seen from the Ninja Turtles cards, chump blockers, the potential for attacking because they've got evasion with their flying, but also they act as fodder for us. And what's nicest about them is that the automaton gives them +1/+1, so they're wind drakes, they're 2/2 flyers. That seems good. Last in this section is a classic. It's Solemn Simulacrum. 4 generic for a 2/2 artifact creature golem that when it enters, we may rampant growth. Search our library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So it finds us one of our mountains. Great. And when it dies, we can draw a card. So, similar to what we've seen already, the Sad Robot comes in, is a fine blocker, but we can sacrifice it to Mica, draw a card off of it, and get that trigger since the Sad Robot is an artifact. And if we were to recur this, since we do have some ways of recurring our cards, we get to rampant growth again. Nice. So that covers our fodder section. Now we're going to go to a little bit bigger section, which is our treasure. These are all the ways that we have to make treasure, or some of these cards actually are treasures. But we're going to start with the currency counter, or converter rather. This card used to be pretty expensive, but it just got recently reprinted in Secrets of Strixhaven Commander. And it's just very good for our deck, considering the kinds of card advantage that we have in red. So for a single generic mana, we get an artifact that says whenever you discard a card, you may exile that card from your graveyard. We'll exile it under the currency converter. That's the way you want to think of it. Then, for 2 and tap, we can draw a card and discard a card, meaning that card we discard, we may exile under the currency converter. And then we can tap the converter to put a card exiled with it into our graveyard. And if that card is a land, we make a treasure. If it's not, we make a 2/2 black rogue creature token. So this is really sweet. Like a way for us to, for all the times that we discard cards in this deck, which is not a huge number, but it's not uncommon, we discard whatever we need to discard in that moment. Oftentimes it's a land, and then hopefully that same turn, we tap the currency converter and turn the land in exile into a land in our graveyard plus a treasure. And if it wasn't a land, we get it back anyway and get a 2/2 rogue. It's back in the graveyard, of course, but still, yeah, we get a nice little creature to go along with it. And if we need to do some looting to maybe find better cards than what we have in our hand, it's only 2 for us to loot with the converter, and that card that we've thrown away isn't useless or gone. We just next turn tap the converter and take whatever we had exiled with it, put it back in our graveyard, and either get a rogue or a treasure. This card is great. Strike It Rich is next. This is a single red for a sorcery that makes a treasure. Done. Flashback for 2 and a red, very good. So being able to say you have a munitions token in play and say, for 1 red, I'm going to sacrifice this munitions token to Mica's triggered ability, do 2 damage to something, and make 2 treasures. And then, knowing that you can flash it back later, it gives you a second casting of the spell. As you can see here, we've got 18 sorceries and 12 instants in the deck. But that doesn't take into account the fact that we have 1 adventure spell in our land base, and a bunch of spells that we can recur from the graveyard in different ways, including through flashback. So we've got lots of ways to keep casting spells beyond just those 30, and Strike It Rich is a great one. Just a single red that we can turn into mana we can use later in the form of a treasure token, or of course as fodder to activate Mica. That's why none of these treasure cards are in the fodder section just because they make treasure. Noble's Purse and Prized Statue both are in that section, but they both make treasure in addition to themselves being fodder. But we can always use the treasure itself as fodder if we need to. Flick a Coin is next. This is a card I played a bunch in Wilds of Eldraine Standard, and it's a weird one. It seems like it's not very efficient, but it can do so much for us. 2 and a red for an instant that deals 1 damage to a target, makes a treasure, and draws us a card. So each mana we're getting something out of. A point of damage, a treasure, and a card. Seems good. Being able to cycle this, because it just replaces itself essentially. For a damage and a treasure, yeah, I just really like this card. It works for us. And we can use this if we've done a bunch of damage to a creature, or maybe a bunch of damage has been done to a creature, and it's surviving with only one, only needing 1 more damage to be marked on it before it dies. We throw a coin out there, and we're all set. Or we copy this with Mica, and we hit a creature that only needs 2 more damage to be marked on it before it dies. Make 2 treasures, so we've been rebated for 2 of our 3 mana, and draw 2 cards. It's just really satisfying. This is a great example of how powerful Mica's effects are, because by just getting rid of a token that we already had on the board, and that we had probably for this purpose, we get to double the effect of a spell that's not terrible for 3 mana, but now is very good. Imagine if it said 3 mana, do 1 damage to each of up to 2 targets, or 2 damage divided as you choose among any targets, make 2 treasures and draw 2 cards. That's crazy. Next up we have Glittering Stockpile. This card is so good, and it's part of a combo in the deck that is not like a broken combo, but it's just a fun one, which was in the original, I think, Riveteer's Rampage Henzi deck back in New Capenna Commander. But yeah, we've got the Glittering Stockpile. This is 2 and a red for an artifact treasure. This is itself a treasure that we can tap and add a red and put a stash counter on it. Stash counters are just used by the stockpile. They don't have a meaning on their own. And then if we tap and sack the stockpile, we add an amount of mana of 1 color equal to the number of stash counters that were on it. So we use this as a mana rock, just a manalith for us, 3 mana artifact that taps for red. And then eventually we can sack it and add a bunch of mana. So it becomes like a super treasure that we're sacking to its own effect. So pretty nice. Next we have Seize the Spoils. Oh, I guess I should mention for Glittering Stockpile, because it will be relevant a little later in this section. Notably, this mana that the first ability adds when we tap it for red and put a stash counter on it is mana from a treasure, because Glittering Stockpile has the treasure subtype, just so you know. Next up, we have Seize the Spoils. This is one of the, I should call it, Tormenting Voice variants, originally from Kaldheim, recently reprinted in Foundations. It is the 3 mana one, and it's great. It's 3 and a red for a sorcery with an additional cost of discarding a card. So discarded, but when we have the currency converter, it's not gone forever. And then we draw 2 and we make a treasure. So normally, Tormenting Voice is a sorcery that requires you to pay 1 and a red, discard a card as an additional cost, then you get to draw 2. Seize the Spoils is exactly that card, but it costs 1 more and gives us a treasure, so it takes that 1 more we've spent and rebates us in the form of a treasure token. That seems really powerful. So discarding a card, useful for us in some ways, but even if not, we throw away a land, let's say, and sack one of our artifacts in play, a token or otherwise, to Mica, and for 3 mana, we've drawn 4 cards and made 2 treasures. Very good. Swarming of Moria is next. This card is a little strange in this deck. It's a sorcery for 2 and a red that makes a treasure token and amasses orcs too, which means, if you don't already create an army, you make a 0/0 black orc army creature token first. We won't. This is the only amass card we have in the deck. And then we put 2 1/1 counters on it, on an army we control, which is the 2 here. So essentially what this does is for 3 mana, it gives us a Grey Ogre, 2/2, and a treasure. So yeah, it's a 2/2 for 2, plus 1 more that we get right back in the form of a treasure. So lots of ways to look at this. A bear that we pay 1 more in order to filter our mana into a treasure token, however you like to look at it. It's just nice to be able to have this and treat it as though it were an extra creature spell that we can copy with Mica. So we get a 4/4, since it doesn't make 2 armies. You only ever have 1 army of any kind, but it will put those 2 counters on the army twice with the copies. So for 3 mana and sack an artifact, we get a 4/4 and 2 treasures. Very good. Next up is one of the 3 versions of the 4 mana upgrades of Tormenting Voice. So much the way we had with Seize the Spoils, we have big score. Actually, we're going to start with the original. Pirate's Pillage is 3 and a red for a sorcery with an additional cost of discarding a card, and you draw 2 cards and make 2 treasures. So it's the same principle as Tormenting Voice plus 1 for Seize the Spoils, and that 1 gives us a treasure. With this, it's Tormenting Voice plus 2, and we get 2 treasures. So this is so much fun. I really love these 3 cards that work this way, which we'll see the other 2 of in a moment, where you spend 4 mana, you get 2 cards and 2 treasures. You did discard a card in the process, so the Pirate's Pillage is just replacing itself and the discarded card when you draw those 2. However, being able to copy this feels amazing. It's like throw away a card, pay 4 mana, and sack a token, and you get to draw 4 cards and make 4 treasures. So you've essentially cast it for free, and you can roll right into your next spell, and you've got 4 cards to do so with. And all that cost you was a token in play, which maybe we got value from anyway, and discarding a card. Crazy. So Pirate's Pillage is the original from Ixalan, or maybe Rivals of Ixalan. I think it was original Ixalan first. Will it tell us? Rivals of Ixalan. There we go. That's 3 and a red for a sorcery version of this. But what if you wanted it at instant speed? Well, Unexpected Windfall lets you do that. It is exactly the same text as Pirate's Pillage, except it's instant speed, and it requires you to cast it for 2 and double red instead of 3 and a red. So slightly more restrictive casting, not really in this deck since we're mono red, but worth remembering. But Unexpected Windfall got an upgrade too, which is Big Score. Big Score is the same as both of those last 2 spells. As an additional cost, discard a card, draw 2, and make 2 treasures, but it's the same cost as Pirate's Pillage, 3 and a red, at instant speed. So this is the best of the 3. So why not run all 3 and get that value over and over and over? So yeah, I love these cards and Seize the Spoils to go along with it. It feels like sort of the little sister of these 3. Yeah, I love it. Stormkiln Artist is next. This is 3 and a red for a 2/2 Dwarf Shaman from original Strixhaven that gets +1/+0 for each artifact you control. This can make it a pretty great blocker, like a pretty good deterrent from us being attacked, because it might be just a huge body, or at least its power. And it has Magecraft, which triggers whenever we cast or copy an instant or sorcery. We are doing some copying in this deck, in fact, a lot of it with our commander. So every time we cast a spell and then copy that spell, we're going to get this triggering twice, once for the cast and once for the copy. And all it does is give us a treasure, but that's like every time you cast or copy a spell, get a rebate of 1. And that treasure is something you can even sacrifice to the next time you want to copy something. In addition, Mica's ability is a triggered ability whenever you cast an instant or sorcery. Stormkiln Artist has the same ability, but also would trigger on copies, but doesn't have to. It triggers on cast as well. So what we can do is we can stack these triggers on the stack in such a way that we are able to make a treasure from Stormkiln Artist, and then, so we have the Stormkiln Artist trigger resolve first, the cast trigger, and then we let Mica's trigger resolve, sack that treasure that the Stormkiln Artist made from us casting the spell, and put a copy of the spell on the stack, which triggers the Stormkiln Artist again, and we get a treasure. So instead of, we can do it if we have something to sacrifice already, where we cast a spell, sack the artifact fodder that we have, and make a copy with Mica, and Stormkiln Artist has triggered twice, and we get 2 treasures. But if we don't have any fodder for this, as long as we can cast the spell in the first place, we stack it so Stormkiln Artist's cast trigger resolves first, we get a treasure, then we resolve Mica's trigger, make a copy, we've now copied something, and we get another treasure. So we're down to a single treasure rather than 2, but we were able to do Mica's copying ability without having any artifact fodder on the board, or without sacrificing any artifacts that we already had. Great. Next is Visions of Ruin. Good for our Reader of Ruins. This is 3 and a red for a sorcery that says each opponent sacrifices an artifact, and for each artifact sacrificed this way, you create a treasure token. So we're not hurting everyone a huge amount if they're themselves sacrificing a clue, or a food, or a treasure of their own, maybe. But if all they have is a soul ring, then yes, we are taking something out, but it's up to them. If they've got any number of artifacts, they're the one that gets to decide which artifact they sacrifice, and that's true for each opponent. So it's possible that we might not have any opponents with artifacts, or we might have some artifacts some opponents without artifacts. So we may not get 3 treasures from this, but a lot of the time we do. And it has flashback for 8 and double red, but it costs X less to cast this way, where X is the greatest mana value of a commander we own on the battlefield or in the command zone. So typically, we don't have Mica anywhere else. Mica's either on the battlefield, in the command zone, or has died and gone back to the command zone. So no matter what it is, Visions of Ruin's flashback cost is discounted by 4, so it's 6 mana for us to do this and maybe get some treasures. And remember, like with all of these sorceries and instants, we can copy this and maybe get even more treasures from it. Flashing it back again is also pretty nice, because these kinds of effects, these like artifact removal effects, most opponents don't expect to see them a second time. They forget about them 3 or 4 turns later, and we get our Visions of Ruin back. Let's move on down. Inspired Tinkering is next. I really like this card from Commander Legends Baldur's Gate. It's 4 and a red for a sorcery that says exile the top 3 cards of your library, and until end of your next turn, you can play those cards, and then make 3 treasure tokens. So it's even easier to cast those spells that we find. And because it says play, if we happen to find any lands and we haven't made our land drop either this turn and or next turn, then we can play those lands. But if we copy this with Mica, then we're exiling 6 cards total, and we can play them until the end of our next turn, and we're making 6 treasures. So in a way, this sort of becomes Escape to the Wilds, which is a card that was banned in Standard. For 5 mana, it put 5 cards into your exile zone that you could play until the end of your next turn, and it gave you an extra land drop. So this is not quite that, but it's putting 1 more card into exile, and it's also making 6 treasures at the same time. So yeah, a real cool card on its own and very powerful in this deck. Reign of Riches is next. Remember we were talking about Glittering Stockpile a moment ago? I love this card. I just really like how this dragon is just like glorying in the treasure, and there's all these other friends with him. Anyway, this is 3 and a double red for an enchantment that says when it enters, we make 2 treasures. Just comes with a 2 treasure rebate. And the first spell you cast each turn that mana from a treasure was spent to cast has Cascade. So that means if we cast any spell and we spend even 1 treasure for a single mana of casting that spell, we get to Cascade, which means we cast that spell and then we exile cards from the top of our library until we find a non-land that costs less than the spell we're casting, and we can cast that non-land without paying its mana cost, if we wish to. We don't have to. If we don't, we take it and all the other cards we exiled and put them on the bottom in a random order. And if we do, we just take all the other cards and put them on the bottom in a random order. So as long as we find something that costs less than whatever we're casting with the treasure, we get a free extra spell. It may be a removal spell that we don't want to cast, which means we just put it on the bottom, but still we had the opportunity to find something good for ourselves. And we can do this basically every turn for at least the next 2 turns if we save our treasures and do 1 next turn and 1 the turn after. Or 1 this turn and 1 next turn, because it's the first spell we cast each turn that mana from a treasure was spent to cast. It's not just our first spell each turn, it's the first thing we spend treasure on. We can't do this multiple times each turn, but still. And with all the treasure we're making, we can do Reign of Riches pretty frequently. Even if not, it gives us 2 treasures we can use and look for something that it will make additional treasures for us. But remember, mana from a treasure, which includes Glittering Stockpile. So we can use this for 1 red mana with its first ability, put a stash counter on it, use that mana to cast anything, and Reign of Riches will give it Cascade, because that mana was from a treasure, not just a treasure token. Nice. Next we have Megaton's Fate. This is from the Fallout Commander product, and it's really neat. It's 5 and a red for a sorcery that says choose 1. Disarm, which means destroy an artifact and make 4 treasures. That honestly is what we're usually doing with Megaton's Fate. We might not, but it is our Wrath in the deck. So if we want to blow up someone's Arcane Signet or their Solemn Simulacrum or something and get 4 treasures, so we get a 4 mana rebate, so this is essentially 2 mana aggregate that we spent, that's pretty good. We can double it, of course, if we've chosen this mode, and we get to blow up 2 artifacts and make a total of 8 treasures, pretty great. Or we can detonate this, which means it does 8 damage to each creature and each player gets 4 rad counters. I just want to talk about this first sentence first. 8 damage to each creature is a solid board wipe. Copying this so it's 16 damage to each creature doesn't necessarily kill everything, but it kills pretty much everything. So a lot of fun for us here if we want to use it as its Wrath mode. But what is a rad counter? This is a cool mechanic from the Fallout decks. Rad counters are counters that go on players. And with this card, they will go on each player. That includes us. Rad counters have this trigger at the start of our first main phase. If we have any rad counters, we mill that many cards. So we'll go to our first main phase, we'll have 4 rad counters, we'll mill 4, and for each non-land we mill, we lose a life and a rad counter. So radiation goes away slowly and unpredictably, and it costs life and puts cards in our graveyard. And this is true for every player. We have to say, hey, did you just draw your card for turn? Okay, it's the start of your first main phase. You've got rad counters. Go ahead and mill that many cards, and you'll lose a number of rad counters equal to the non-lands you mill, but also lose that much life. So yeah, this is a pretty fun mechanic, I think. It puts cards in our graveyard, which can be useful to us since we can recur things a little bit, and of course, is our Wrath. But if we don't need it as a Wrath, we just blow up an artifact, or 2, and make 4 treasures, or 8. Next is Brass's Bounty, named of course for Admiral Beckett Brass, who I love from the Ixalan story and setting. Also, Admiral Beckett Brass, the card, was my very first commander for the first commander deck I built, so a lot of affection for her. Look her up, she's really cool. This card is a 6 and a red sorcery that lets us make a treasure token for each land we control. So if we've got 7 lands, we're making 7 treasures. If we've got 14 lands, we're making 14 treasures. They don't even come in tapped. So that's a lot of fodder for us and a good way to essentially have a ritual that has mana that sticks around. And if we copy it, nice. Finally, we have the upgraded version of Brass's Bounty. Since this was from original Ixalan block, Hit the Motherlode is from Lost Caverns of Ixalan. It's 4 and triple red, so 7 mana, for a sorcery that says Discover 10. If the discovered card's mana value is less than 10, make a number of tapped treasure tokens equal to the difference. Discover is a little bit like Cascade. We exile cards from the top of our library until we find a non-land, mana value 10 or less, and then we get to cast it without paying its mana cost, or we can put it in our hand. Cascade doesn't let you do that. And then we put the rest on the bottom in a random order. So the idea here is we find something that's either expensive and we get a few treasures, or something that's cheap and get a lot of treasures. Those treasures do come in tapped, but we can still sacrifice a tapped treasure token to Mica as fodder for his ability if we want to copy something. Or we wait until next turn, we get to use those treasures as treasures, And if we copy Hit the Motherlode, we get to discover 10 twice, make a bunch of treasures from each of those castings, and get to cast 2 free spells if we wish to, or put those spells in our hand, or 1 of each. Nice. And that covers our treasure section and sort of the big thrust of our game plan. We've got a lot more that goes into this. But before we get to it, do you maybe feel like liking the video? You don't have to. I would just appreciate it if you would. Actually, I appreciate you watching either way. You don't have to like the video. Feel free. Yeah, just thanks for joining me. So that covers, like I've said, most of our game plan. We're going to start talking about our sections of the deck that are meant to support that game plan, starting with our card advantage section, which as usual I have tagged as draw. It doesn't mean all these cards draw us a card or draw us a card without also discarding a card, but they all work this way for us, and it's the same section, just as shorthand. So we've seen the currency converter. It does draw us a card, but then discard a card. So not traditional card advantage, but it gives us the ability to get something out of those cards we discard. So that seems good. Wizard's Rockets, when it goes to the graveyard, we get to draw a card. Grab the Prize is another Tormenting Voice variant. This is a sorcery for 1 and a red with additional cost for us to discard a card. And when we do, we draw 2, and if the discarded card wasn't a land, then it does 2 damage to each opponent. So a little bit of burn on top of us discarding something as long as it's not a land, and if it's a land, it's still Tormenting Voice, which is totally fine. And of course, if you're paying additional costs, I guess I should mention, you do that in order to put it on the stack. And once it's on the stack, Mica's ability triggers, and you can choose to copy it. You will not have to discard an additional card, because that's to cast it. You are copying the spell, it's already on the stack, which means we'll draw 2, and get to do some damage to our opponent, and then we'll draw 2 more. Acre Wellspring, when it enters or goes to the graveyard, we get to draw. Idol of Oblivion, we've already seen so many ways of making tokens, mostly fodder for sacrificing to our commander or treasures, but we've also got some token creature creation in this deck, as you've seen. Idol of Oblivion is here to take advantage of all of that. For 2 generic, we get an artifact that lets us tap it to just draw a card, but only if we've created a token this turn. So as long as we have made a treasure, we tap this and we get a free card. As long as we've made a 1/1 robot, we tap this and we get a free card. Idol of Oblivion, often in our deck, says draw an extra card every turn, just wait until you've made a treasure first. Very good. But we also have the ability, if we need to pay 8, tap and sack it, and make a 10/10 Eldrazi creature token. Not usually what we have this in here for. We get a lot more value out of just drawing cards off of it, but sometimes you need to make a 10/10 at instant speed. Yeah, very good. Manhole Cover, we've already seen. We can pay 2 and sack it to draw a card. Mind Stone is really more of a ramp piece in this deck, but it's also got the ability to let us draw a card. For 2 generic, we get an artifact that taps for colorless, so a solid 2-mana rock, or we can pay 1, tap, and sack it to draw a card. So what we normally look at this as is a inexpensive mana rock that comes in untapped that we can cash in for card draw if we're desperate to draw a card, or more often, late in the game when we just don't need the mana from it anymore. We just pay the 1, sack it, draw a card. We've seen the Academy Manufacturer. It's in this draw section because it makes clues for us. Clues can be sacrificed to draw cards. That seems good. Next up, yet another Tormenting Voice variation. This is 2 and a red for an instant called Electric Revelation that says, as an additional cost, discard a card and draw 2. So this is just Tormenting Voice for 1 extra mana, but at instant speed. And the additional benefit of it is it has flashback built in for 3 and a red. Again, at instant speed, and we can copy this on our opponent's turns if we need to. We pay 4, flash it back from the graveyard, discard 1 thing, and draw 4 things since we've copied it. Yeah, Electric Revelation is not a card I'd typically play, but it's very good in this deck. We've seen Flick a Coin, draws us a card in addition to doing a damage to any target and making a treasure. Seize the Spoils, draws 2 for us, makes a treasure. Solstice Revelations from Avatar The Last Airbender is a lesson instant. Lesson's not relevant, but it's an instant for 2 and a red that says exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost if the spell's mana value is less than the number of mountains you control, and if you don't cast that card this way, put it in your hand. So it's kind of like discover into the first non-land you find, and you get to either draw it, essentially, put it in your hand, or cast it for free if its mana value is less than the number of mountains we have. And we've got lots of mountains in this deck. So yeah, Solstice Revelations is pretty fun as a way to draw a card, or maybe draw 2 cards, maybe cast 2 free spells, or 1 of each, you never know. And of course we can flash it back for 6 and a red. So kind of an expensive flashback cost, but being able to do that and then copy it gives us maybe 2 more spells that we're able to cast and then copy as well with Mica. Neat. Tablet of Discovery is next. This is a new Secrets of Strixhaven card. For 2 and a red, we get an artifact that says when it enters, we mill a card and we may play that card this turn. So that is drawing a card, basically. If we have a land that's milled and we haven't made our land drop yet, we just play it from our graveyard because it doesn't say cast, it says play. And if it's a spell, if we have the ability to cast it somehow, we just do that from our graveyard since we have the permission to do so. So it was essentially a card that we had access to in a way that's similar to exile the top card of your library, you can play it this turn. This is the same thing, but it stays in our graveyard if we don't do that. And like I say, we have some recursion in this deck, or maybe it's a card that has flashback on its own, and if we can't cast it this turn because we can't afford to, no big deal, we'll cast it again later with flashback. Tablet of Discovery is also a red manolith. It taps for 1 red, or we can tap it for double red, but only to cast instant or sorcery spells. So that includes either the red or the double red, the card that we milled and can play this turn. So this is a nice piece of acceleration for us, and a 2-mana rock that taps for 2 for more than 30 of the spells that we can cast in this deck. That seems pretty good. We've seen Big Score and Pirate's Pillage. They're both drawing us cards and making treasures for us. The Sad Robot draws us a card when it dies. We've seen all of the rest of these except for one. Hit the Mother Lode discovers for us, that gives us card advantage. Rain of Riches can let us cascade, card advantage. Inspired Tinkering exiles the top 3 and we can cast them until the end of our next turn. That's card advantage. And Unexpected Windfall, just like Big Score and Pirate's Pillage, draws cards. Throes of Chaos is the last spell here. It's 3 and a red for a sorcery with 2 words, Cascade and Retrace. So when we cast this, we cascade for 4, meaning we find a non-land that costs less than 4, and we can cast it for free if we wish to, or put it on the bottom with the rest of the cards we found. And Throes of Chaos has Retrace, which means we can pay 3 and a red and discard a land in order to cast it from our graveyard. So this gives us a way to use the lands that we're drawing with all of these draw effects. All these lands we're putting in our hand are ways to essentially flashback Throne of Chaos, or Throes of Chaos. So we get to find a free extra spell by just casting this from the graveyard with Retrace. We're turning these lands in our hand into additional retraces, essentially. And of course, we can copy Throes of Chaos itself with Mica, or the spell or spells that Throes of Chaos finds for us whenever we cast them with Cascade. Nice. So that covers our card advantage section. Next up is Acceleration. We've got only 10 cards in this, which is all we need, but we've got so much treasure creation in this deck that it does not feel like this is all we have for Acceleration. So of course we're running Soul Ring, single generic for a rock that taps for 2 colorless. Perfect. It helps us out with our expensive stuff. It helps us out with our commander, who's 4 mana. Yeah, whatever we need. Wayfarer's Bauble is next. This is 1 generic mana for an artifact that if we pay 2 and tap and sack it, we get to Rampant Growth. So Rampant Growth in a mono red deck is very, very good. I know it looks like it costs 1 more, but really 2 generic to Rampant Growth is better than 1 and a green to Rampant Growth because it's fixed for whatever colors we need. And it does cost the 1 more, but that 1 more doesn't have to be on the same turn. So we play this maybe turn 1, turn 2, we crack it, and we're Rampant Growthing just as fast as, a green player who didn't play a Llanowar Elves. So yeah, pretty good for us. Arcane, and of course, Wayfarer's Bauble, if we don't need the mana, is solid fodder if we need to use it as such. Arcane Signet is a 2 mana rock that taps for 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. So it is a rock that taps for red. That seems fine. It's not like Fire Diamond, which comes in tapped, so coming in untapped is really good. And it just accelerates us for just 2 mana. That's what we want. Much like the Mind Stone accelerates us for 2 mana, but this does it with colored mana. And of course, all of these mana artifacts sometimes are worth a lot for the mana that they can make for us, or the land they can find for us. But other times, their biggest value is being sacrificed to Mica so that we can copy a much better spell that's an instant or sorcery. Yeah. Next up from the Final Fantasy set is Poo Poo UFO. This is an 0/4 flying artifact creature construct alien. An alien. Don't really know what's going on here. I'm not a Final Fantasy guy, so if you know in the comments what this thing's deal is, let me know. I'd be interested to find out, but I do not have enough interest to look it up. So this is, 2 generic for a flying 0/4 that says we can tap it to put a land card from our hand onto the battlefield. Like I mentioned a moment ago with Throes of Chaos, we need to be able to use these lands in our hand beyond just playing them as our land drop. Throes of Chaos lets us turn them into additional copies of Throes of Chaos, essentially. Poo Poo UFO lets us accelerate them into play terrain generator style. So this is a great way to ensure that we don't have to discard a hand size if we've drawn, 8 cards off of our big scores and Pirates Pillages and stuff, and to get ourselves more mana that we can use right away because it does not say put it on the battlefield tapped. And finally, Poo Poo UFO says we can pay 3, and if its power becomes equal to the number of towns we control. We're not running any towns, we're using it for this, it's good enough for that. And it's a solid blocker, or it's an artifact, so we can sack it to Mica. We've seen the Glittering Stockpile, it taps for red. Inspiring Statuary is next. 3 generic for an artifact that gives all of our non-artifact spells Improvise, which means we can tap our artifacts to pay a generic mana, pay into the generic mana cost of a non-artifact spell. So we've got 25 artifact spells, but we can at least use those artifacts when they are in play if we're not using them to, tap for mana or tap to put cards into play. We can cast let's say Mana Geyser, by tapping Inspiring Statuary, and that pays for one of the generics in this 3 generic cost. So Inspiring Statuary becomes a mana rock for all non-artifact spells that don't just have a purely red casting cost, which I think we only maybe have 2 cards in the deck that have a cost that it's only red mana and no generic. So yeah, Improvise can really help out on all of our instants and sorceries, as well as any of our creature spells as well. Yeah. Tablet of Discovery, we've seen, taps for red or double red if we want to use this mana for an instant or sorcery. Sad Robot, when it enters, Rampant Growths. And finally, we've got Mana Geyser. This is our biggest ritual of the deck. That is an actual ritual. It's 3 and double red for a sorcery that makes a number of red mana equal to the number of tapped lands our opponents control. We get 1 red for each tapped land our opponents control. That's crazy. In Commander, sometimes people leave mana up, but for the most part, people are tapping out every turn. So this can make us a huge amount of mana. We're only going to cast it if it's making us more than 5 mana, obviously. But we might even cast it if it only makes us 4 mana, if we can copy it with Mica, and then end up with 8 total mana. So it's essentially added 3 mana to our pool, less the 5 we had to spend to cast it. But what if our opponents have, a total of 12 lands tapped among them? We cast this and copy it with Mica. We've just added 24 mana to our pool. Hopefully we have some draw spells that we can use to burn through all of what we're going to do with that mana. Mana Geyser is just a lot of fun, and it often makes a huge amount of mana for us. So if we get this on the stack and copy it, and someone responds by killing Mica, we can just recast it. We've got a lot of mana to do so. That is our acceleration section. Next up, we have a discounts section, which is not something we get to see a lot in the decks that I build, especially because I have a mostly firm rule that I don't put cards in my decks that cost $10 US or more at time of recording. It's just, I make an exception for this occasionally, and as you can see today I did with Longshot. It's just, I like to build my decks in a way that have cards that are, the deck is itself meant to be a budget thing, but also cards tend to represent power level. And I'm trying to build cards for a specific kind of table. So not usually a rule that I break. I have occasionally in the past when I've been playing I have an Errant and Giada Flash Flyers deck, and High Fate Trickster is a Flash Flyer that gives all of my other spells Flash, and it was like $15. And it fit in the deck so well that I just had to do it. Check the video's description for that deck, because it was a lot of fun to play and to build. But yeah, normally I wouldn't do this, but Longshot just works for us. So Longshot is 3 and a red for a 3/3 legendary human rebel ally with reach, because of course Longshot is an archer. That says, even though not an archer type, it says non-creature spells you cast cost 1 generic less to cast. This is, I believe, 50 plus spells in our deck, because this is non-creature. It's not just instants and sorceries, it's all of our artifacts as well. Anything that isn't a creature gets a discount, and I think we have a total of 53 cards in the deck, plus that adventure that's attached to a land. So 54 cards. 2 of those are non-creatures that don't have any generic costs. So a total of 52 spells we can cast, not counting spells we can flash back, that have generic mana components to their costs. So Longshot discounts all of them. Normally, I don't run discount effects of any sort, no matter how much they cost, unless they help me cast 40 other spells. We're above 50 with this. So Longshot just works so well for us. And there are other spells that give us an effect like this, but not spells that are also a gutter snipe. Longshot says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, again, not just instants or sorceries like gutter snipe itself, but any of our artifacts as well, Longshot deals 2 damage to each opponent. So yeah, Longshot is here, making our Soul Ring free, doing 2 damage and burning everyone multiple times every time we cast spells on our turns, usually. We're getting copies an awful lot, but being able to double or even sometimes triple spell on our turns is not uncommon. Longshot turns that into direct damage and makes it easier for us to multi-spell, since all of our spells, for the most part, are costing less. Great. That is our discount section. We'll get back to these copies soon. We're going to move on to our interaction section, which as usual I've tagged as removal. So we have Creator's Clause. This is a sorcery for X and a red that does X damage to any target. We can hit players, we can hit planeswalkers, we can hit creatures, whatever we need. And it has Ferocious. It deals X plus 2 instead if you control a creature power 4 or greater. Luckily, Mica is a 4/4 because Mica is jacked. So we're able to cast Crater's Claws, and we can even have X be 0, and it's still doing 2 damage to any target, which just means this is a sorcery speed shock. And if we copy it, it's doing 4 damage, 2 to something and 2 to something else, or both of those 2s to the same thing. But we can pump this up quite a bit, in this deck especially, and then copy it with Mica. What if X is like 8? Then we're doing 10 damage. And if we copy it, we're doing 20 damage. This can kill 1 or sometimes 2 opponents just with a big fireball style blast. So yeah, very cool. Galvanic Blast, since we're talking about blasts, is next. This is from Scars of Mirrodin, a single red for an instant that does 2 damage to any target. But if we have 3 or more artifacts, it does 4 damage instead. So it's just an upgraded shock if you've got extra artifacts, and we will. So yeah, there's Galvanic Blast for you. It's hard to argue with. Lightning Bolt. It's a red deck. We're running Lightning Bolt. It's so good. A single red, an instant, it does 3 damage to any target. We can go face with this. We can kill creatures, planeswalkers. We can hit battles if we want to help someone out. Lightning Bolt is just so good. It's just enduringly good from Alpha. So if you're running a red deck and you're not like, red is just a tiny splash in your 4-color deck or something, if you've got red, put Lightning Bolt in your deck. You'll never be sad you did. We've seen Shell Shock. It can do X damage to up to 3 different creatures, or a number of creatures equal to the number of opponents we have. A Braid is next, and I'm using the new Secrets of Strixhaven Mystical Archive printing because it's gorgeous. For a single red and for a generic and a red, we get an instant that lets us either do 3 damage to a creature or destroy an artifact. So, artifact removal, a little bit of creature removal. We do have to choose the mode when we cast it, so if we copy it, we will be doing the same mode twice, but that's 2 artifacts, or 6 damage to 1 creature, or 3 damage to 2 creatures. That's like 2 lightning bolts to creatures for 2 mana. Seems good. Yeah. Next up, Crackle with Power. This is another one of our more expensive cards in the deck that's just so cool. I would have liked to have used one of the several different versions of Strixhaven or Secrets of Strixhaven printings for it, since it was originally a Strixhaven card, and they brought it back in the Secrets of Strixhaven Mystical Archive. But the cheapest printing is Crackle with Power from the Breaking News bonus sheet from Outlaws of Thunder Junction, and it's also fine. It's just not gorgeous like the other ones. So this is triple X and double red. So we have to pay double red and then at least 3 more for 1/1/1 if we want to have this be X equals 1. It's a sorcery that deals 5 times X damage to each of up to X targets. So if X is 1, then that's a total of 5 mana to do 5, which is 1 times 5, damage to 1 target. That's, a limited removal spell. 5 mana red spell that burns something for 5, sure, that's fine. We can go face with it, so it's already kind of better, but it is at sorcery speed. But what if X is 2? Well, then that's 2, 2, 2 plus 2 for a total of 8 to do 10 damage, 5 times 2, to each of up to 2 targets. Okay, so we can do 10 damage to one opponent and 10 damage to another opponent. Feels like we've already seen something like that in the form of Crater's Claws. But what if X is 3? That's a total of 11 mana. That's a lot, but we got a lot of treasures in this deck, I'm just saying. To do 15 damage to all 3 of our opponents. Or, of course, we can hit creatures with this, or planeswalkers. Crackle with Power is expensive, but very flexible, and very, very fun to be able to say, yeah, I can manage 14 mana. That's 20 damage to 4 targets. I'm going to choose all 3 of my opponents, and let's say they're 1/1 Goblin, just to make that Goblin have a terrible day. It's sort of like a Star of Destruction directly to that Goblin. Yeah, Crackle with Power is a lot of fun. Dragon Spark Reactor is next. 1 and a red for an artifact that says when it enters, or when another artifact enters under our control, we put a charge counter on this artifact. Obviously, charge counters don't have a meaning other than that they are used by this card. And for 4 and sack it, it'll deal damage equal to the number of charge counters on it to a player and a creature. They don't even have to be a creature that is controlled by that player. So we can just play this out, it starts with 1 counter, and we just keep playing over and over and over all of our artifacts, all of our spells that make artifacts, because it does not say non-token artifact here, and it just gets huge. And eventually it becomes 10 counters, 15, 20 counters, and we pay 4 at instant speed, mind you, sacrifice it and do that much damage to a creature and to a player. Great. Next, we've seen the Master Foundry. It'll enter or leave and make a 1/1 robot, and we can pay 4 and a red and sack it to do 3 damage to a creature. We've seen Weapons Manufacturing as well. It shocks something every time we sacrifice one of these munitions, and we get the munitions whenever we have a non-token artifact enter. Flick a Coin does 1 damage to any target. Megaton's Fate does... It does 8 damage to each creature, but that's a wrath, actually, instead of an interactive spell. It's in this section because it can destroy an artifact, plus make us 4 treasures, and then we're really more likely doing that with it. And we also, from the Final Fantasy Commander product, have Mega Flare. This is 2 and a red for a sorcery with Kicker for 3 and double red, meaning in order to kick it, we would have to pay 5 and triple red. If it was kicked, however, we make a 6/6 red dragon creature token with flying. So we get a dragon. That seems good. And a 6/6 flying dragon for 5 is not too far from rate. So the 2 and a red has got to be an effect for us anyway, and this dragon is sort of a bonus. And it says for each opponent, choose up to 1 target creature that player controls, and Mega Flare deals damage equal to the greatest power among creatures you control to each of the chosen creatures. So let's say this is not kicked. Much of the time, this is 3 mana to do 4 damage to 3 different creatures, 1 for each opponent. Because Mica has 4 power. And if Mica's our biggest creature, then that's what we're doing. If we're copying this with Mica, then we're doing 4 damage to 6 creatures, or maybe for some opponents, 8 damage to 1 creature, because we get the first instance of Mega Flare, 4 damage to each to a creature controlled by each player, and then the second instance of it that we've copied, or actually the copy resolves first, but you get it. But if we kick this, we get that dragon as well, and we get the dragon first, so we're actually doing 6 damage to each target if this is bigger than Mica, which means 6 damage to each creature, or if we have paid 8 mana to cast this, made a dragon, and copied it, we're going to get a dragon for the copy, and then 6 damage to 1 creature per player, per opponent that is, from that copy. Then the second Mega Flare, the second resolution of the original one, will give us another dragon, and we get an additional 6 to everything. Very cool. 2 dragons plus a total of 6 damage per opponent to one of their creatures twice, if you want to put it that way. Yeah, or like think of it as us sending 36 damage around the board in addition to getting 2 6/6 flyers. For 8 mana and sack an artifact, seems pretty good. And that covers our interaction section. As I've said, we are running 1 Wrath. It's Megaton's Fate. We've already seen it. Lets us do 8 damage to each opponent, or to each creature rather, if we want to try and wipe the board. And then each player gets 4 rad counters. And of course, if we copy it with Mica, we're doing 16 damage to each creature, and each player is getting 8 rad counters. That's pretty good. So that covers our support section. We've got several other sections that supplement our game plan and that round out our tags. So let's take a look at our payoffs. These are cards that reward us for what we're going to do already. We've seen some of them, but we haven't seen Coruscation Mage. This is 1 and a red for a 2/2 Otter Wizard with Offspring 2. Offspring is kind of a kicker cost. We can pay that 2 as an additional cost if we wish, meaning we're paying 3 and a red. And if we do, when the mage comes in, we make a 1/1 token copy of it. So it's the same as the mage, but it's a 1/1 instead. And it has this ability as well. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So another Gutter Snipe style effect. It doesn't do 2 damage, but it does trigger on our artifacts rather than just instants and sorceries. And if we have Offspringed this, then we paid 4 total mana for it, which is 1 more than Gutter Snipe, and we've got 2 creatures that both trigger when we cast non-creature spells, so it's triggering on more things than Gutter Snipe and doing the same amount of damage, since each is doing 1, and we have 2 of them. So yeah, Coruscation Mage is pretty solid early on, and it's good later on too. It just scales with this Offspring cost. Nice. Dragonspark Reactor triggers whenever it or an artifact enters. We've got artifacts entering all the time. Master Foundry triggers when it enters or leaves, so we get that payoff there as well. Ravenous Robots is another artifact that or another permanent that triggers when we cast an artifact spell. Very nice. Weapons manufacturing triggers when we have non-token artifacts enter. Pretty close to what we're doing anyway. Young Peasy is next. Young Pyromancer is 1 and a red for a 2/1 human shaman that makes us a 1/1 elemental creature token when we cast an instant or sorcery. Like I mentioned, we've got 30 of those in the deck, plus +1 in our land base in the form of an adventure, and we've got plenty of spells that we can recur and get more Young Pyromancer triggers. Most of the time with the Young Peasy, what we're doing here is giving ourselves blockers, giving ourselves chump blockers that we can stop our opponents from attacking with, and just getting more and more value out of each of our creatures. The best way to look at these kinds of triggers is imagine if every one of our spells also made a 1/1. That seems good. Now, it will not trigger on the copies that Mica's making, just on the spell we're casting, but that's still pretty good. We've seen the Academy Manufacturer. It rewards us when we make our treasures by giving us clues and food as well. Stratified Hanger Automaton rewards us for any of these artifact tokens we're making by giving us Thopters in addition. We have not yet seen Weftstalker Ardent. This is one of my favorite cards from Edge of Eternities, and it's my favorite version of the Impact Tremors effect. 2 and a red for a 2/3 Drix Artificer that says whenever another creature or artifact you control enters, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So it's sort of like, it's doing the same job that Corsation Mage is doing, but rather than triggering on our instants and sorceries, it's triggering on our artifacts and creatures entering. So that includes all of our token artifacts, all of our token creatures. So Young Pyromancer triggers on an instant or sorcery, makes a 1/1 elemental. That elemental enters, the Weftstalker Ardent sees it, does a damage to each opponent. Yeah, so we've got Impact Tremors for creature fall and artifact fall. Yeah, Weftstalker Ardent helps us out a lot. And has Warp for a single red, meaning we can cast it instead of for 2 and a red, we can cast it for a single red. It will come in, and at the end of turn, we exile it at our next end step, and we can cast it from exile on a later turn by paying the 2 and a red. So if it looks like we don't have the mana this turn to get out an artifact or several artifacts or something like that, while also paying 3 for our Ardent, we can just pay 1 this turn, get all the value we can out of its triggered ability, and then it goes to exile at the end of turn. We cast it on the next turn when we've got more mana available to us, and we can keep going with all of its burn. Or pinging, if you want to call it that. Longshot, another even better gutter snipe for us, triggers whenever we cast a non-creature spell and does 2 damage to each opponent. Stormkiln Artist, whenever we cast or copy an instant or sorcery, gives us a treasure. And finally in this section is Rite of the Dragon Caller. 4 and double red for an enchantment that gives us a 5/5 flying dragon creature token whenever we cast an instant or sorcery. So this is expensive. And it is expensive in the sense that it's 6 mana for an enchantment that doesn't do anything right away. But we get this in play, and it survives to the next turn. Or maybe we do have something, maybe we have a lightning bolt in the meantime that we can cast. When we do, whether it's at instant speed on an opponent's turn or during our turn or whatever, we get to add a really great chump blocker to it, at the very least, a 5/5 flyer. But being able to keep casting instants and sorceries and keep making more and more dragons, this is what I mentioned earlier on in the heart of the deck about being able to have a sky full of dragons. Yeah, nothing wrong with some Shivan dragons even without fire breathing that we get for free with just this 6 mana investment a little earlier on. Nice. So that is our payoff section. Next up, let's talk about all the ways we can burn our opponents. We've seen most of them. Crater's Claws lets us hit any target for X damage or X+2 if we have our commander out, at least. Galvanic Blast can usually do 4 damage to any target, but sometimes just 2. Corsation Mage burns our opponents for 1 every time we cast a non-creature spell, as does its offspring. Crackle with Power can hit any target and does 5 times X damage. Dragonspark Reactor can hit a player and a creature for an amount of damage equal to the number of charge counters on it when we sack it. Grab the Prize can hit everyone other than us for 2 if when we cast it, we discard a non-land. We haven't seen Price of Progress. This is a classic card that sees play in, pretty much every format that it's legal in. It's just wonderful with great RKF art. It's 1 and a red for an instant. It's instant speed. Not everyone notices that. And it does 2 damage to each player equal to the number for each non-basic they control. Twice the number of non-basics they control. So in Commander, that's a lot of damage. A lot of people run pretty greedy mana bases and don't run as many basics as, as they could. I'm not going to say as I often do in my decks because I like basics. But yeah, if someone's got out 6 or 7 non-basics, they're taking 12 or 14 damage. And this affects us too, obviously. If we've got some of our non-basics out, which we have some of, then this will do damage to us. But it's a classic red strategy to do more damage to your opponent than you lose life on your own. It doesn't matter how much life we lose as long as we're the last person to have life to lose. So yeah, Price of Progress is a delight for this deck. Weapons manufacturing, whenever we sack any of these munitions tokens it makes, we get to do 2 damage to any target. Flick a coin does 1 damage to any target. Weftstalker Ardent burns our opponents every time we have creature fall or artifact fall, non-token or otherwise. Longshot burns each of our opponents whenever we cast any non-creature spell, and Megaton's Fate can do 8 damage to each creature, which is not burn, that's removal, it's a wrath, but it also gives every player rad counters. Rad counters can cause them to lose life, and that's burn. Technically, some people might call it drain, but yeah, it's still doing direct damage to players, so that's what I consider burn. That is our burn section. Let's go back to that copying section we saw a little bit ago and take a look at 3 cards we haven't seen yet. Return the Favor is double red for an instant with Spree, meaning it's never just 2 red, because we have to choose at least 1 additional cost, but we can choose both if we want. Each one costs a single generic mana, so we can cast this for double red and 1 or double red and 2. Either way, but we can only choose each additional cost once, of course. For the first mode, we can copy an instant, sorcery, activated ability, or triggered ability and choose new targets for the copy. So this is a really cool effect. Being able to copy an instant or sorcery for just 3 mana, we do that on an opponent's turn, copy one of their spells, or we could copy it on our turn if Mica's not in play, or this is the same effect. We could copy Mica's copy ability if we wanted to, but we would have to sack an additional artifact, which maybe is something we want to do for some reason. So yeah, but we can also copy any of our other triggered abilities that we're seeing. It does not even say activated ability or triggered ability, instant or sorcery that you control. So like I say, we can copy our opponent's stuff, whether it's their spells or their abilities. Return the Favor is great. Or we can use it to protect ourselves and change the target of target spell or ability with a single target. Maybe this is something where we're sending a burn spell at an opponent's creature and they give that creature hexproof. Well, we'll change the target to something that doesn't have hexproof. Or maybe they're sending something at us and it's a spell or ability. So we can do either one and we change the target to something other than us. Maybe they've got a Cyclonic Rift that they're going to try and hit us with. Or just a regular unsummon on one of our creatures. On Mica, we don't want that. We move it to one of their creatures. If it can target their creature, as long as the target's legal, we can change it. Very nice. So yeah, Return the Favor can do both if we want. Good flexibility. And if we copy this, then we don't get to choose the modes again because they're just additional costs, but we can choose new targets for the modes if we need to. Next is Tempt with Mayhem. This one's so fun. It's 1 and double red for an instant with Tempting Offer. Choose target instant or sorcery spell, which means it's got to be a spell on the stack already. But when it's on the stack, we can choose it, and each opponent may copy that spell and may choose new targets for the copy they control, and we copy the spell once, plus an additional time for each opponent who copied the spell this way, and we can choose new targets for the copies we control. So let's say we put Lightning Bolt on the stack, targeting opponent A, and then we cast Tempt with Mayhem for an additional 3 mana. We know that any of our opponents who want to are going to get a free Lightning Bolt. We also know we are going to get a free Lightning Bolt because it's... But if any of them take a Lightning Bolt, then we get one for them as well. Tempt with Mayhem gives us, at the very least, copy a spell. But if any of our opponents want to copy it as well, we get an additional copy beyond that other one for all the copies that they choose to make. And the way this resolves is all of our copies will go on the stack at the top. Under it will be their copies, and under that will be the original spell that we targeted. So Tempt with Mayhem resolves, and the way this plays out is we get as many copies as we get, which is equal to 1 plus the number of copies our opponents made. Then each of our opponent's copies will resolve, and then our original spell, or the original spell, if it's not one that we cast, will resolve. So Tempt with Mayhem can be a huge blast to the whole board. It can be just a lot of fun. Somebody casts like a doppelgang or a rite of replication. We copy that. We let everyone copy it, including the person who originally cast it. We get an extra copy of it. Yeah, just a lot of fun. Last in this section is Cursed Recording. This is 2 and double red for an artifact that says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, put a time counter on this artifact. Again, no inherent mechanical meaning of this counter, just used by the artifact. And then if there are 7 or more time counters on it, remove those counters and it deals 20 damage to you. So yeah, this is not a payoff card, even though it's got a trigger for casting instants and sorceries, because we would prefer it not to do that 20 damage to us. Now, it can, and that's okay. It's a 40 life format, we might be able to tank the 20 damage. Usually though, we don't want it to. But what's the benefit of this card? Well, when we tap it, if we tap it rather, when we next cast our instant or sorcery this turn, we copy that spell and we can choose new targets for the copy. So this is all very powerful. Being able to get this out and then hopefully that same turn, tap it, cast an instant or sorcery, sacrifice an artifact to Mica's trigger, and now we have 2 copies of the spell plus the original spell itself. We do that, having cast the instant or sorcery, we put our first time counter on it. So it's a ticking clock. We're going to die in 7 days is the idea behind this Duskmourn card. So the way we want to do it is we just copy 5 spells over the course of 5 turns. Just get additional copies beyond whatever we would have gotten from Mica, or maybe in lieu of that if we don't have things to sacrifice. And then when it comes time to cast our 6th spell, we activate the Cursed Recording, cast our 6th spell, it will trigger and put a 6th counter on itself, but so will Mica trigger. And with Mica's trigger, we sacrifice the Cursed Recording to make a copy of the spell we cast. So now we're going to get that original spell, the copy from Mica from having sacrificed the recording, and the copy from the Cursed Recording. So we get 6 turns of bonus copies from this Cursed Recording, or more if we're willing to tank that 20 damage, because if we cast our 7th spell, we're going to take the 20 damage no matter what when this is on the battlefield. Which means we don't always necessarily get 6 out of this if we're casting multiple instants and sorceries in the same turn, because we might be only able to copy 1 of those during our turn, so we have to be a little careful. But if we can tank that 20 damage, then we do remove all the counters and the clock will start again and we can keep going. So in a classic red fashion, maybe it's worth taking this 20 damage to get a lot more damage from all of these instants and sorceries we're copying. And yeah, interestingly, if we are able to tank that 20, only the second time it hits 7 will it kill us. So that's 13 spells before we die for sure. Anyway, Cursed Recording is really cool. I don't see it a lot in the decks that I have seen people play, so it would be really fun in this deck. And that is our copying section. Next, we're going to talk about our Recursion. These are all cards that either can come back from the graveyard themselves in the form of Flashback for Strike It Rich and Electric Revelation and Solstice Revelations, or can come back with Retrace like Throes of Chaos lets it, so we can cast this over and over. The only card we haven't seen in this section has Flashback itself for 5 and a red, but Sorceress's Schemes is a sorcery for 3 and a red that lets us take an instant or sorcery from our graveyard or exiled with Flashback and put it back in our hand, and then spend a red, or add a red to our pool. So we get a 1 mana rebate right away that we do have to spend that same phase if we don't have an interest in, like, if we wanted to keep it, we have to cast a spell right then with it. But we've got it to cast. So what's great about Sorceress's Schemes is it can get back any of our cards from our graveyard, and if we exiled any of these cards, or any of these 3 cards with Flashback, Sorceress's Schemes can get that card back into our hand from exile. So, casting Strike It Rich, for 1, gives us a treasure. For 3, gives us another treasure and exiles it. Sorceress's Schemes can get it back from exile, put it back in our hand, and gives us a red mana that we can use to cast it again, put it back in our graveyard, and get another treasure. Or we Electric Revelations or Solstice Revelations to get more cards either in our hand or maybe even cast them for free, and Sorceress's Schemes can get them back for us. But it's even better if we're casting an even more impactful spell, like one of our Fireball variants, or again, just classic Lightning Bolt, get it back from the graveyard, and we're flashing it back for 4 mana and getting a rebate of 1 that we could use to cast that Lightning Bolt again right away. Great. That's our recursion section. We have a little bit of protection in this deck. We've seen 2 of them so far. Manhole Cover, when it first enters at flash speed, can give a creature indestructible, protects our commander. Return the Favor can let us choose the target of a spell or ability with a single target, so that can protect our commander. We also have Swiftfoot Boots, 2 generic mana for an equipment that equips for 1 and gives the equipped creature hexproof and haste. Haste can be relevant in this deck. Maybe we put this on one of our 5/5 dragons from Ride of the Dragoncrawler, and we can swing in with it right away. But oftentimes we're putting the Swifties on Mica to give him hexproof in order to protect him and keep the ball rolling. So yeah. Next up, after our protection section, is this graveyard section. I just wanted to point out that these are all the cards that put other cards in the graveyard, and mostly it is with discard. So these are all cards, with one exception, that feed the currency converter. Currency converter itself, we can pay 2 and tap to draw and discard. Grab the prize, Electric Revelation, Seize the Spoils, Big Score, Pirate's Pillage, and Unexpected Windfall. All 6 of these cards are variants of Tormenting Voice, which requires us to, as an additional cost, discard a card. So all of those let us discard for the currency converter. Tablet of Discovery, I guess it's 2 cards that don't discard, has us mill 1, and we can play that this turn, so it's actually card advantage, but it does put a card in our graveyard, which may be relevant for us. And Megaton's Fate can give each player rad counters, which, if that includes us, which it'll have us mill. So that's another thing to put in our graveyard. We're not taking a lot of advantage of our graveyard section, as we just saw of our graveyard zone, that is, as we just saw in our recursion section, but we have some, and technically currency converter is not really recursion, but it lets us get a little bit of value out of our discards, so yeah, not bad. That is the graveyard section. I just want to take a look at all the ways we have to make creature tokens in this deck. So we've seen all but one of these. Currency Converter can make us a 2/2 rogue if, when we put a card exiled with it into our graveyard, that card is not a land. Devastating Onslaught can make token copies of artifacts or creatures that we control, and that seems good, or a target artifact or creature. Idol of Oblivion can be sacrificed to make a 10/10 Eldrazi, but usually we're tapping it to draw cards every turn we make a token. Mauser Foundry makes us a robot when it enters or leaves. Ravenous Robots makes us a robot whenever we have an artifact, whenever we cast an artifact spell. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, Young Peasy makes us an elemental. Mega Flare can, if we kick it, make us a 6/6 dragon. Stridehanger Automaton gives us a 1/1 flying Thopter every time we make any number of artifact tokens. Swarming of Moria makes us an Orc Army token. And if we copy it, that Orc Army token is going to be a 4/4, otherwise it'll be a 2/2. Ride of the Dragoncaller, every time we cast an instant or sorcery, gives us a 5/5 flying dragon. And finally, Fury Gale Flocking is 8 and double red, so a 10 mana sorcery, but it costs 1 less for each instant or sorcery in our graveyard. So not too hard to cast early on, much cheaper later on. And for each opponent, we make 2 3/3 blue and red elemental creature tokens with flying that attack that opponent this turn if able, and they gain haste until end of turn. So the idea behind this being, we cast this maybe for quite a bit less than 10, but maybe for 10, and we get 6 tokens that are all going to attack this turn. 2 3/3s that will go against opponent A, 2 against opponent B, and 2 against opponent C. And if we copy this with Mica, we're getting 12 of these tokens, 4 of which will go at each opponent. 12, of course, assuming 3 opponents. So yeah, this is a lot of fun. It's a whole lot of tokens all at once. We're not going to get to use them as blockers unless they survive this turn and then untap next turn, but we do get to suddenly surprise our opponents with 6 or maybe 12 damage in the air just by resolving this spell. This spell, which itself might only cost us 2 red mana. Neat. So that is our token section, and all of the sections of spells in our deck. As usual, we're going to go over our land base now, starting with not our basics, but these 2 artifact lands. We're running Darksteel Citadel and Great Furnace. Darksteel Citadel taps for colorless and is indestructible, and Great Furnace taps for red. But what's relevant about these cards is that they are artifact lands, which means these are not spells, they are lands. But if we have them enter, any of our cards that trigger whenever we have an artifact enter will trigger when these artifact lands enter. Additionally, we can sacrifice these, even the indestructible Darksteel Citadel, to Mica, since they are artifacts, in order to copy whatever spell has triggered Mica's ability. So yeah, a nice additional 2 artifacts that aren't tokens, beyond just the 25 artifacts we have in the deck. Or maybe it's included in there, I think. Yeah, possibly. Anyway, we've got these in case we need additional artifact fault triggers and in order to sacrifice something to Mica's triggered ability. After that, we're running 26 basic mountains. Of course, we're using these ruins from the art from Secrets of Strixhaven with a bunch of Lorehold style spirits in the art. Yeah, this is just the number of mountains we stuck with. It's a pretty solid number. You can certainly add more lands that are non-mountains, but we do have at least one card that cares about the number of mountains we have. And it's just good to be able to have a lot of untapped sources that make the color we're using. So yeah, that's our basic count. We've got these 3 fixing lands. We're running Dwarven Mine, which is also a mountain, technically. It's a fun card from original Throne of Eldraine. It enters tapped unless we control 3 or more other mountains. So if we have 3 basic mountains in play, this will come in as an untapped land, and when it enters untapped, we make a 1/1 dwarf. So we get a free extra token in our land base that we can hopefully get from the Dwarven Mine by just playing it as our 4th land or later. And, of course, being a mountain, it taps for red. Sure. Myriad Landscape is a tap land that taps for colorless, or we can pay 2, tap, and sack it to search our library for up to 2 basic land cards that share a land type. So in this deck, it'll be 2 basic mountains. And then we put those on the battlefield tapped and shuffle. So while this is a slow card, it comes in tapped, the mountains it finds are tapped, and we have to pay, tap, and sack it to use it, it is 1 land drop that's turning into 2 mountains in play, and that's pretty good. So a little bit of slow acceleration, if you'll pardon the oxymoron, and we like that in our land base. Similarly, we've got Temple of the False God. It's not everyone's favorite card, but it is an untapped land that taps for 2 colorless mana, so it's a soul land, like Soul Ring. We just can't activate it unless we have at least 4 other lands, so 5 or more including itself. Which means it's not acceleration early game, because we won't have enough lands for it to be that. But acceleration, even though it's most powerful in the early game, is still useful mid and late game. Temple of the False God, I mean, the last spell we looked at costs 10 mana before cost reductions. Temple of the False God is a 5th of the way there. If we play this as our 5th land, it jumps us from making 4 mana to making 6 mana, and that can be significant. Yeah, it's solid. For the power level of decks that I build for this channel, Temple of the False God is a good inclusion. Finally, we have these 7 utility lands. So Buried Ruin is here to bring back our artifacts. It's an untapped land, taps for colorless, and if we pay 2, tap, and sack it, we can return an artifact from our graveyard to our hand. It's as simple as that. Any of our artifacts we need to get back, maybe it's our Soul Ring that we've sacrificed to Mica, maybe it's any other artifact that wasn't a token, we just get it back with Buried Ruin. Nice. Demolition Field is next. As I often say, the kind of decks that I build for this channel are of a power level that the pods that want these kind of decks don't look kindly on land destruction or any kind of mana denial. And that's totally fair. Not everyone wants that in their commander game. But you do have to have an answer to a problematic non-basic, like a Rogue's Passage in a Voltron deck that's causing their, giant commander to swing in unblockably. Or a Glacial Chasm in a deck that's preventing all the damage that we might want to do to them. Basically, any land that is empowering their game plan or disempowering ours is a threat, and we need to be able to answer that threat in a way that is for these kinds of tables something that doesn't really deny them mana necessarily, but does give us the ability to have an answer. And a one-of answer to lands in a deck is not too much. So Demolition Field is a good answer for this. It's untapped land, taps for colorless, or we pay 2, tap, and sack it, and we get to destroy a non-basic that an opponent controls, and that opponent gets to shuffle their gets to search their library for a basic land and put it on the battlefield untapped. And so do we. So neither we nor they are down a land, and we even get lands into play that are untapped. We can tap for mana right away, assuming, of course, we have basics left. But being able to not deny that player mana and just deal with their problematic non-basic, even the most mana denial averse tables usually don't have a problem with Demolition Field. Now, of course, someone might be running a bounce land, which makes 2 mana. Or they might be running, a 3 or 4 color deck, and we use Demolition Field to take them off of one of their colors. That's not really what this is here for. You can do that, depending on what your pod is into, totally fine. But usually, Demolition Field is meant to be a low cost of inclusion answer to non-basics that are problematic, not really a way to slow down an opponent's mana production. Up to you though, play it how you like. Forgotten Cave is next. This is a tap land that taps for red, or we can cycle it for a red, meaning we can pay a red and discard it from our hand to draw a card. One more way to discard cards, maybe for our currency converter, or this card at least. But again, much like the Mind Stone, early in the game, if we're desperate for a card, we can cycle the Forgotten Cave. Late game, if we draw this and we don't need any more lands, we cycle it to get a different card. Totally fine, and it makes red for us. Fountain Port is next. This is such a toolbox card in a deck that cares about so many tokens and cares about treasures. It was hard not to include. This is, and it's a couple of dollars, but it goes in so many decks. So if you ever take this deck apart, you're going to have your Fountain Port to put into something else. This is an untapped land that taps for colorless. We can pay 2, tap it, and sack any token we want, creature or otherwise, to draw a card. A great way to turn our treasures into card draw. We can also pay 3 and tap it and pay a life to make a 1/1 blue fish creature token. A surprise chump blocker for a non-trampling creature seems good. And if we've just got mana lying around, which sometimes we do in this deck, but usually we're spending it, but just in case, if we want to bank it and make some treasure, we can pay 4 and tap the Fountain Port and make a treasure token. Next we have Lindblom Industrial Regency. This is a town. We do have a town in this deck. Based on our poo-poo UFO, maybe this will be relevant. Probably not. So this is a tap land that taps for red, and that's okay. But it also has an adventure built into it. If you haven't seen adventures before, the way this works is this card is a land card that we can cast the instant adventure on if we want. If we cast this from our hand, the card then goes to exile, and we can play Lindblom as our land drop from exile whenever we have a land drop free. So either we're casting the spell and then exiling the card to play this as our land on any turn, that same turn or later, whenever we have a land drop available, or we're just playing it as a land and then we don't have access to the adventure. If it's in play, can't cast the adventure. It's either send yourself on an adventure and then discover this land, or just go to the land but without any adventure. That's how it works. But the adventure is Mage Siege. This is an instant speed adventure for 2 and a red that lets us make a 0/1 black wizard creature token with, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So another little gutter snipe style trigger, but hitting non-creature spells, pretty good. It's an 0/1 black wizard, so this is a black mage token from the Final Fantasy set. That if we're able to cast this and copy it, we get 2 of them. And then we've got Lindblom in exile that we can play as our land drop, maybe even that turn. Nice. Next, I mentioned Rogue's Passage. We've got it ourselves. And mostly in this deck, we're not using it for our own creatures. We sure can if we need to. Maybe it's going to be the difference between killing an opponent and not. Or protecting our creature if we have to attack with Mica. But usually we're using this in other ways. So this is a land that taps for colorless, or we can pay 4 and tap it to make a creature unblockable this turn. So I like to say that there's 3 ways to use this. For our own creatures, politically, or strategically. For our own creatures, it makes sense. We make Mica or some one of our other creatures, maybe one of our flying dragons, unblockable, and we swing in and we get some good damage. We use it politically, and that means we target an opponent's creature, because it doesn't say target creature you control. And we say to an opponent, look, if you leave me alone for a turn cycle, or you give me some other kind of consideration for this, I will use my Rogue's Passage to make your creature unblockable, and you can attack another opponent and do a bunch of damage to them without having to worry about being blocked or trading in combat. An opponent, like opponent A, if they have a big creature and they're trying to kill opponent B anyway, they might be into that. And they'll say, sure, activate your Rogue's Passage. And we will say, no, you have to attack first. Because if we activate the Rogue's Passage and make your creature unblockable, you could attack us with it. And then we wouldn't be able to block. And they will say, okay, that's fair, I will trust you, I will declare attacks with this creature. And we will say, sure, we will also be fair, we will activate our Rogue's Passage, because now we know all we had to do was spend a little bit of mana, and they used their attack step to tap down a creature that now can no longer block us, to attack someone else, so they're not attacking us, and to do damage to a different one of our opponents. Great, Rogue's Passage helps us there. Or, strategically use this exactly the same way as you do politically, but you don't make a deal first. You say, you look at opponent A, who's already attacking opponent B, and before blocks are declared, you make one of their creatures unblockable without them either expecting it. Most times, players don't jump in and interact with someone else's combat. They might interact with some of the creatures in it if they're not involved in that combat, but if it's two other players, you don't usually see someone pumping up an attacker's attacking players attacking creatures, or like with Rogue's Passage, making them unblockable. Sometimes you do, and it's always exciting when someone jumps in and says, this looks like it might be beneficial to me to make that creature unblockable. So yeah, Rogue's Passage is a great way for us to get damage in on our opponents using our other opponent's creatures by making those creatures unblockable. Finally, we have Secluded Starforge. This is an untapped land, taps for colorless. We can pay 2 and tap it, and tap any number of untapped artifacts we control to give a creature a power boost equal to the number of artifacts we tapped. Only at sorcery speed, so we can't use this super politically by helping our opponents out. But we could do something like, maybe an opponent says, I have a kill spell, but it only works against creatures power 4 or greater, and the creature that's problematic on our other opponent's board is power 2. We might activate the Starforge to pump up their creature to make it a legal target for that removal spell that a different opponent has. You never know. Usually, though, you use this effect on your own creatures. You make one of your dragons, or maybe one of your Thopters, really big, attack someone who can't block, and do a bunch of damage to them. We've got a lot of artifacts in this deck, and tapping untapped artifacts is basically improvising with them. So being able to improvise power onto a creature can be pretty nice. Or, if, again, much like Fountain Port, we can pay 5 and tap it to make a 2/2 robot artifact creature token, which is not just a creature that we can attack or block with, but it's an artifact that we can use as fodder for our commander. And that sums it up. Again, I'm releasing new Secrets of Strixhaven commander decks every Thursday through the end of June when Marvel Superheroes drops, which will be through the end of next week. So tune in next week to see my final Prismari deck. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you want to support what I do here, make sure to like and subscribe, ring the bell if you want to be notified when my videos go live. Consider joining my Patreon at patreon.com/secondmonitormagic or becoming a member of this YouTube channel. And remember, most of all, that magic is fun. You should play more Magic.